Hello, and thank you for being here. I want you to just take a second, get comfortable, and take a breath. What we're going to talk about today is heavy, but it's also full of hope. I want to start by asking you a question. Have you ever felt like you're living life with the brakes on? Like there's this quiet, nagging feeling that no matter what you accomplish, no matter who loves you, there's something fundamentally wrong with you? It's that little voice in the back of your head that whispers, "You're not good enough," when you succeed, and screams it when you fail. That feeling, that deep, heavy sense of being flawed, has a name. It's shame. And it's like an invisible cage that so many of us live in. It holds us back. It makes our relationships feel complicated. And worst of all, it makes us believe that we are the only ones who feel this way. It makes us feel completely alone. If you remember in the previous parts focused with the shadow work, we concluded that if we want to meet with the shadow, that suppressed and neglected part of ourselves, it's important that our inner child actually gives permission. We said that we have suppressed a part of our existence, our identity, and our psyche throughout life, as if we've imprisoned it somewhere, tried to distance it from our awareness and consciousness. We said that the cries of this suppressed part echo throughout our entire life and psyche, weaving through and filling all the corridors of our lives. The path to liberation, in fact, is to open that door and confront what we're so afraid of. What we now call the shadow or monster or whatever it may be. We said that when we open the door, instead of the monster we imagined, we find a child there, a child we've neglected for years, a part of our existence. And that's why we said that if we can meet this child or embrace it, new doors will open in our psyche and in our life. And this can have very significant positive impacts on both our lives and our society. Honestly, I want to continue the discussion about the shadow with another approach and use various resources to get closer and closer to this meeting. It occurred to me that to meet our inner child, we need to turn to a source, and this might untangle many of our knots. I searched, and well, I'm not a psychotherapist myself. At best, I'm someone who has experienced these kinds of wounds and is looking for resources for my own healing. That's why I started here on that basis, searched, and found a book that I think we need to address in several parts. The topic we want to talk about is shame, and now I'll expand on it further. It's a topic that requires deep thought and reflection. It's not just about exchanging information. We need to pause at certain points, go through some exercises, and actually do them. That's why this part, and the next few parts, I don't even know how long they will take, will be about meeting this child and about the experience of shame, which I think most of us, if not all of us, experience. I think we can even apply this label to an entire society, looking at the mechanisms that shaped it and concluding that this society is a shame-based society, or we can see a generation in this way, as if it's a generation shaped by shame, a generation that was controlled or raised using shame. This makes it a very widespread experience, meaning the things we want to talk about will seem very familiar. I should also mention another reason why I'm breaking the book into small pieces and approaching it this way. When we face this phenomenon of shame, intense emotional and sensory impulses might be triggered in a person. That's why, for example, we'll move forward with one piece of the discussion per week and allow that emotional release to happen during that week, so we're ready to address the next piece, and so we'll move forward together like a river. I don't even know what we might encounter just a little further ahead, but I've done my best to choose a source written by someone who has truly understood the topic with their heart and soul. The book we want to talk about is called It Wasn't Your Fault, written by Dr. Beverly Engel. The title of the book reveals the entire story of the path we want to take in these parts. Liberation from shame caused by abuse in childhood through the power of self-compassion. It mentions both the pain it wants to address, shame, and the method of healing, which is self-compassion. And of course, we need to address it practically. We must experience it. The author dedicated the book to the child who carried the burden of all the pain alone. And this is actually a good introduction for us to start and dive into the book. If we want to define shame, one important aspect is that the author says shame is a lie that was told to you about yourself. Shame is a lie that was told to you about yourself, and you believed that lie. And that lie has influenced all your emotions and your entire life. A point the author starts the book with is that shame has many different faces. For example, anger is a very straightforward feeling. You don't confuse anger with other emotions because anger is anger. Fear is fear. You feel it as it is. But shame is a deceptive feeling because it wears many masks. At first glance, it might not seem like our main problem is shame, but it's important to recognize these different faces so we can get closer to the root. One of the faces of shame is self-criticism and self-blame. In fact, shame is like anger directed inward. If someone experienced abuse in childhood, which we'll talk more about later, they might feel anger about the injustice, about the situation they went through. But that anger has turned inward, transforming into self-criticism and self-blame. Remember earlier when I said shame is a lie that was told to you about yourself? In self-criticism and self-blame, we keep repeating that lie to ourselves because we've believed it. Another face of shame, and when I say these different faces of shame, they're not necessarily all present in one person, meaning you or I might only have one or two, but they could be intense. There's also a test in the book that we'll go through together, which will show how much we're dealing with this challenge or not. But I want to say it's not like we all have all of them. One of these faces might manifest in us. Another face of shame is neglect of self. For example, we might see someone who is completely devoted to others, whose thoughts and life revolve around helping others, serving them, or taking care of them. And we might even label this person with the sacred label of selflessness. But if we dig a little deeper and look more closely, we're faced with someone who is actually neglectful of themselves. And the root of this goes back to the feeling of worthlessness they have toward themselves. You know what I mean? I mean to say that even behind an appearance of selflessness, there might be deep pain and suffering hidden. Yes, it's good that we do good for others, but the point is that when it becomes extreme and when we completely forget ourselves, that's when our antennas should go up, signaling that the root of this is likely shame. Another form of shame is self-destructive behaviors. The author writes that some people are accident-prone, meaning they're scatterbrained. When you look at their relationship with their body, you see a kind of disdain for it, manifesting in various ways, such as neglecting their body or harming it, running into walls, being careless. And one of the main reasons for this is that, as I mentioned in the previous part, these children faced a painful reality in childhood. And to escape that reality, it's as if they built a spaceship, got on it, and went somewhere above that reality, outside this world and this life. So when you see these kinds of children, you notice they have a lot of imagination as adults. Your first encounter with them is that you see how colorful their world is. Unicorns, winged horses, magical kingdoms. But behind this colorful world, you see a kind of escape, like a curtain drawn over a harsh reality. The child using this defense mechanism knows, on an unconscious level, what's behind that curtain. Because the reason for this neglect, this absence, this not seeing objects, this daydreaming and being lost in the clouds, is actually something painful or frightening they faced here. And they haven't forgotten that reason. They're still continuing to build those fantasies. So, one face of shame is self-destructive behaviors. Another face of shame is perfectionism and fear of making mistakes. The author says that sometimes children have been so emotionally abused, criticized so much, pressured with unfair standards, and measured against expectations where they were never enough that their cup of shame overflows. They think that if they make even a small mistake, if even a drop more of shame is added to that cup, it will overflow, as if it will explode. That's why they're even afraid of making the smallest mistakes, you know? And this leads to perfectionism, a constant vigilance to ensure they don't make even the slightest error, like putting their shoe on the wrong foot. The root of this is that just think for a moment that we know, scientifically, that the correct way to learn is through trial and error. Children make mistakes, then improve, make mistakes, and so on. But for a child where mistakes weren't part of their learning process, but rather a painful feedback about their identity, where they were told they were a failure, not that they could have done better here. Like, what kind of childhood experience does this person go through? And how do they see the world? The author says that sometimes these people even succeed, but they secretly envy the life of an ordinary person. In other words, they find people attractive who aren't as successful by modern standards, but are content, at peace with themselves, and in harmony with themselves. These are the kinds of people who catch their attention and create a kind of I wish feeling, like, I wish I could live with such peace with myself. Another face of shame, we said shame is deceptive and wears many faces, is the fear of happiness, because shame stems from a core belief about ourselves that we don't feel worthy of happiness, that we feel worthless, that we feel bad about ourselves, that we think it's our fault for something we'll talk more about later. So we don't see ourselves as deserving of happiness. This is a very important point. Sometimes when good days come for anyone, the reaction of these children, these people, in those good days is that they get worried. Something's wrong, or maybe something's mistaken. For example, the author says that when someone shows them kindness, because they can never properly receive that kindness since they don't give it to themselves, they become suspicious. What's the catch? How can this person be kind to me? Or they feel like, when will they figure out who I really am? Recognize the real me and run away from me like everyone else, like I run from myself? Or they worry that this happiness won't last long because they don't feel worthy of it. Or worse, like when they feel this happiness, they sabotage it. Unconsciously, right at the moment when things are finally settling down, when their job or emotional life is starting to go well, they do something unconsciously that destroys everything because the familiar state for them isn't happiness or peace. You see how deceptive shame can be, and even from their own perspective, they wonder, why did I make that decision or do that in that situation? Extreme approval seeking is another face of shame. Some people are constantly seeking validation from everyone that I'm good, It's important for everyone to be loved by their friends, by the limited number of people who care about them, but extreme approval seeking means that your identity is conditional on everyone's approval. You know why? Because you haven't approved of yourself. There's a hole and you're trying to fill it with everyone and with 8 billion people, but because you're not in that hole, because you're not facing yourself, that hole remains empty. It never gets filled. It's a black hole, not just a hole. And this extreme approval seeking means that even if many people like you or approve of you, a single criticism or a slight blame can shatter everything you've built and reactivate that core painful belief from childhood, where you internalized feelings of worthlessness and shame within yourself. Another one is addiction. Addiction very often, or perhaps all addictions, can be traced back to shame. In the episode where we talked about Matthew Perry Chandler, this was very clear in that person's lived experience. Addiction comes in various forms, and in general, addiction in one word is numbing yourself for a short time. It means that person is escaping from something, and they know that the method they've chosen might kill them, but they won't stop until they face what they're escaping from. What is that terrifying thing we're so afraid of that we're willing to poison our bodies just to not be here? And this is some of the faces of shame that the author starts with to show us that what we're talking about can wear many disguises, and at first glance, we might not recognize it as shame, but it could very well be the root of our biggest problems in life. But how is shame created? The author says it's because of abuse. If we want to attribute it to one word, one reason is abuse in childhood. The author explains that there are 3 different types of abuse: physical abuse, emotional abuse, and sexual abuse. Sometimes a child might experience all 3, sometimes just 1, or sometimes 2, but let's start with physical abuse. The most common form of physical abuse, which is often called discipline, is being hit or physically punished. The body of a child who is punished physically can experience various forms. It's not just the severe forms like whipping. Sometimes it's pinching, sometimes slapping, sometimes pushing, whatever it is. So the obvious form of physical abuse is being physically punished as a child. However, the victim might later tell themselves, I deserved it, or I was such a naughty child, or it was for my own good, or it helped my upbringing, or we were a generation that was treated that way, and that's what made us who we are. If it hadn't been that way, what would we have become? But let me tell you, humiliating or physically harming a child in any way, under any circumstances, never has a positive impact on a child's life. It might make them do their homework in that moment, but the most important thing in a human being, their self-esteem, their courage, their ability to just be themselves, their humanity, is taken away forever. Another form of physical abuse is neglecting a child's physical needs. Starting with simple things like ignoring needs such as a child's clothes needing to be clean or their food needing to be appropriate. A generation that, for example, grew up drinking water from the gutter and takes pride in it as nostalgia is unaware of how much they were neglected physically. In this dichotomy that started with Descartes, mind and body, soul and body, priority was always given to the mind, the intellect, and the soul. But now we can say they're all one. But the body was seen as something dirty, a nuisance. If it was useful at all, it was only for being sacrificed for something greater, like a big idea. It had no inherent value, and suddenly you see that over decades in our society, there are people who have no relationship with their bodies at all. They don't exercise, they don't eat healthily, they don't even think about it. It's just a nuisance, a shell that needs to be suppressed and gotten rid of. I want to say how this physical abuse can have cultural and sociological roots in society and be legitimized, meaning it's seen as a good solution, as something that helps people achieve salvation or progress. There are three main categories of abuse. The first was physical, and I mentioned some examples. The second is emotional abuse. In emotional abuse, the child isn't faced with direct physical punishment, but experiences being controlled or disciplined through shame as a tool. Things like ignoring, threatening the child. These threats to the child have many branches. Threats of punishment, threats of not being loved, threats of dying, threats like a parent saying, if you're running wild, I'll end it all, leaving you to roam free. The impact this has on a child's mind is huge, and it's common. We don't realize it, but we're doing it in various places without knowing the effect it has on people. Shaming, belittling, comparing in front of others, focusing on flaws, shaming in front of others, humiliating. All these are examples of emotional abuse. When you look, you see that these have been common and standard disciplinary methods in our society, and it feels like the shared story of all of us. Let me say something here to our audience, you who are listening. We're not divided into two groups, parents and children. We're all in this together. When we hear these things and want to take action, don't see yourselves as parents, as if you're on trial or guilty. Even if you feel your current behavior toward your child isn't right, the path to healing relationships is to connect with yourself, to see yourself as that child, not as a parent wondering, what did I do? What happened to you? What was your experience? If this is corrected, and it will be corrected, we'll move forward together in a miraculous way, and your relationship with your child will also improve, despite all the ups and downs. So we're all, in fact, a group of children who have experienced this shame, maybe without even realizing it, projecting it onto our own children, but now we're talking about it to recognize it and free ourselves from this prison. The third type of abuse is sexual abuse, physical, emotional, and sexual. This is another spectrum ranging from the most horrific form like rape to other forms like verbal sexual harassment or physical sexual harassment. This is one of those untold stories in our culture. When you dig a little beneath the surface of society, you see these intense shared stories that because of shame, modesty, and various taboos, have always been denied. People haven't talked about them, and the way victims of these incidents have been treated has often produced even more shame in them. This is also an experience where, if you investigate, you'll see that when a child has experienced this kind of sexual abuse and it's exposed, the behavior of others towards silencing them or telling them, "You're also to blame, look at what you did to cause this," and so on, has all been part of it. I should also mention a criterion for sexual abuse that the author talks about, which is very important. She says that sexual relations or any form of sexual interaction that constitutes abuse can sometimes even happen between two children. The author explains that if one child in the situation is 2 years older than the victim child, we can call it abuse. But why? It's not always a violent adult. Why? Because in a child's mind, even a child just a few months older, let alone 2 or 3 years, seems like an entirely different generation. For example, in school, the older grades seemed so much older to you. So, a child's experience of that sexual relationship isn't much different from their experience with an adult. This is also an important point, one of those taboo-breaking moments for me. The story of childhood experiences can deeply shape a person's life, and we'll explore this further in time. Dr. Beverly Engel, the author, shares that she faced significant challenges growing up, enduring various forms of hardship. Reflecting on her childhood photos, she notices a change. As a baby around 6 months old, her eyes held a bright spark of joy, but over time that light faded. By her later photos, the joy and vitality seemed to have dimmed. She describes her mother as someone burdened by deep, unhealed shame, which, without intending to, she passed on to her daughter. This created a heavy sense of self-doubt and unworthiness in the young girl. At 9 years old, Dr. Engel experienced a traumatic event that left her feeling responsible, as though she had somehow caused it. For years into adulthood, she carried this misplaced guilt, believing she was at fault. This highlights a profound truth about children. They are incredibly loving and quick to blame themselves for things beyond their control. This is why it's so vital to protect them, through laws, education, awareness, and improved systems. Children, the most tender and open-hearted part of society, often internalize pain and need our care and advocacy to shield them. Dr. Engel shares that even as she pursued her studies in psychology, she struggled to accept kindness. When someone was kind to her, she felt suspicious, wondering, what do they want? I don't deserve this. She often pushed kindness away, feeling it might come with hidden motives or pain. This shows how deeply shame can affect someone, making even compassion feel like a trap. Yet it also underscores the incredible power of unconditional kindness. In a world where shame is common, someone who offers kindness without expecting anything in return can be a source of healing. Their generosity can help others begin to trust in compassion again, offering hope to those who've long felt unworthy. Dr. Beverly Engel has worked on shame for 35 years. Her own experience was this, and then all her research and clinical path with people was about this. She can be called a wounded healer, someone who has experienced the wound themselves and is trying to heal others. The path of healing in this book has 5 stages. I'll just read them, and then each one has exercises and stories. We'll go through all of them step by step together. The first is self-understanding, then self-forgiveness, then self-acceptance, then self-compassion, and finally the last is self-transformation. You know, this is the path that, when we walk it, gradually, when we can once again meet that child we talked about at the beginning, alongside this path that we're traveling together, we'll explain the terms. It's good, for example, to watch a movie. You know, it's good to sometimes write something down, to be more careful with ourselves on this path. And I want to approach it this way. I think from here on, we can't just keep our feet in the water. We need to dive in. We need to let ourselves join this river and become the river. That's why I invite you to come with us, to travel this path together, because I'm sure it can untangle many individual and social knots, and it's a very important task that we should dedicate time to and do. As a homework assignment or task until the next part, I suggest watching a movie. The movie is called Good Will Hunting. There's a very important scene in this movie, the line, "It wasn't your fault," which is a significant dialogue in that scene. It might not directly be about shame, I know, and maybe you've seen this film before, maybe I have too, but let's watch it again. This time with the lens of shame and with the brilliant title of the book, It Wasn't Your Fault. And see the story through that. Let's end the discussion here for now. I've just given an introduction about what the issue is, the faces of shame, and the cause of shame, and I want you to think about your own experience over the next few days until next week. You don't need to write anything down right now or do anything. Just watch Good Will Hunting. Alongside this, and let me also say that if, for example, at night, like it happens to me, these thoughts come up, some of which can be disturbing or distressing, don't escape into your phone or somewhere else. Let them come. Just tolerate them a little. This is part of the process so we can reach the next stages. Don't deny them, don't try to absolve anyone, and just allow yourself to experience what we've talked about here. I think this is a good place to stop the discussion, and we'll continue in a few days after this introduction. We've only just begun the introduction, and let me also say that since we're starting a journey here, this is a great point to invite others to join us because we're on a path, and maybe it will get late. I mean, it's a journey that, if we start it together from the beginning, will be more engaging. If you want to introduce the psyche alchemy to others, now is a good time. Thank you very much. Thank you for listening to us, and we'll continue the discussion on shame very soon. Best wishes to you all. Thank you for joining me on this journey of healing and transformation with Psyche Alchemy. If this video resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and hit the bell to stay part of our community exploring the depths of the psyche. Share your thoughts or experiences in the comments. I'd love to hear your story. Until next time, keep flowing toward your true self.